questions. At the end of that, I'm going to check the chat, which I can't see right now, and see if we have anything else. And then I want to just touch on some a brief discussion of the roots of Christian nationalism and where it is right now. I was planning to end with the strengths and weaknesses of Christian nationalism, but a couple of you asked me, what's my problem with Christian nationalism? So I'm going to address that. I'm going to address that early on. So hold on. It's not letting me move my screen. Okay, so we started with the rally on January 6th and what happened there. And I was really interested in the fact that there was so much Christian imagery going on. And I was also interested in the people who were talking at the event and after the event and how they made references to their faith and to Jesus and to Christianity. And so that was part of the reason, a large part of the reason why I wanted to teach this class. I actually wanted to teach it for a while before now, but this brought it to light. We went over, here's the prayer that the QAnon shaman gave, thanking Jesus for allowing them to enter the Senate chambers and take it over and leave a threat for Mike Pence. And the responses that we got to the riot or insurrection or whatever you want to call it. One was like Joe Biden, who said these were not real Americans. And so to discount anything that they were doing and to reject them. The funny thing is they think they're the real Americans and people like Joe Biden are not. And then there are the others like this cartoonist, Mike Lukovich, who argues that they're all crazy and we don't need to understand them at all. So I'm arguing that there's another way to deal with this, and that is to see most of them or many of them as Christian nationalists. And we went over what is a Christian nationalist, and I focused on Jenny Cudd, a Midlands, Texas florist who was one of the people who raided the building. She videotaped her statement and went into Pelosi's office, took a bunch of stuff from there. And she explained exactly her belief system, why she was doing what she was doing. And we took what she had to say and I sort of fixed it up a little bit and gave us a definition of the basics of Christian nationalism. There are three parts. One, you have to believe that the United States was founded by God as a Christian nation. So that's the past. You have to believe that the country has since strayed from its godly origins. And sometime in the past, it's not clear exactly when. Some people have this view that we had this mythic period where everything was okay. I tend to think that many of them are thinking about the 1950s, but we can discuss that later. And then finally, that America must return to its roots by adopting Christian or biblical principles. A couple of you had questions about what are exactly biblical principles, and I hope to deal with that shortly. The fact is, this isn't just a minor, obscure group of people, and that many Americans, in fact, the majority of Americans agree with the first principle that I laid out. And you see 26% say America currently is and has always been a Christian nation. 32% believe America was, but is no longer a Christian nation. And then finally, 20% say it has never been a Christian nation, and 21% of the people just don't know or didn't want to answer that question. So you have 50% of the people who say, yeah, the first point that they're raising is correct. The second point that we've fallen away, or the third point that we need to reinstitute a Christian nation, is the main point of dispute. A number of our politicians, knowing that we believe this, or that many of us think this, will state this back to us repeatedly. I just picked Mitt Romney. I could have chosen any of 20 or 30 other people. Ours is a nation which is based upon Judeo-Christian values and ethics. Our law is based upon those values and ethics. You'll see this phrase, Judeo-Christian values. That's a term that emerged in the 1950s. You won't find many Jews who use this term. It's mainly a reference to Christians who want to adopt Old Testament principles or ideas, particularly the 10 Commandments, and use those in making their arguments. Then we got to, are you a Christian nationalist? And there are a number of political scientists and religious scholars who are looking at this issue right now. You can find a number of books dealing with this. I'm using a description used by Whitehead and Perry. They're two political scientists who are probably the best people on this right now. They ask 6 questions and they ask you to answer, and then they grade your score from 0 to 4 and decide whether you're a Christian nationalist or not. The first one, should the federal government declare the United States a Christian nation? Should it advocate Christian values? Should it ease strict separation of church and state? Is church and state something that we should do away with, or that it never should have existed? Should we allow the display of religious symbols in public places? You know, a nativity scene at City Hall, something like that. Is the success of the United States part of God's plan? And should the government allow school-sponsored prayer in public schools, or state-sponsored prayers in public schools? And you're asked to say whether you disagree entirely, disagree, neutral, agree, or agree entirely. And if you disagree entirely, you get a score of 0. If you disagree, 1, neutral, 2, agree, 3, and agree strongly, you get a 4. So you can range anywhere from 0 to 24. And they found, using this scale, which they've used several times, that they've broken the field into 4 categories. People who score between 0 and 6 are rejectors. People who support separation of church and state, resistors 7 to 12, accommodators from 13 to 18, and then ambassadors from 19 to 24. And ambassadors would be Christian nationalists, definitely Christian nationalists, and 32%, the accommodators, would be people who are sympathetic to them. So these are their definitions. Rejectors completely reject any notion that Christianity should be privileged in the public sphere. Resistors, religion can be useful, but they're uncomfortable with privileging Christianity. And accommodators, these are people sympathetic to Christian nationalists. They believe religion can do good things, but don't necessarily think it should be privileged all the time over other religions. And then finally, the ambassadors, the Christian nationalists. They strongly embrace Christian nationalism, want a very tight relationship between what their view of Christianity is and what the United States advocates. Christian nationalists aren't tied to any particular denomination, any particular region of the country, any particular demographic element. And the things that predict best whether you're a Christian nationalist, if you agree with a number of these factors. 1, that you identify as a political conservative, and it's not just all political conservatives here. This is just one element of what it takes to be a Christian nationalist. 2, you believe the Bible is the literal word of God. 3, that you believe the U.S. is on the brink of moral decay. You believe God requires the faithful to wage wars for good. You believe in the rapture, that there's going to be a time where Jesus returns and will take his people up with him to heaven. And then finally, the only demographic factor that does play a factor, and that is that you have a lower education, you're high school educated or less. The lower your education, there is a correlation between the lower your education achievements and whether you are a Christian nationalist. There are a number of Christian groups that are now stepping up and opposing Christian nationalism. The National Council of Churches has a group that it started, and last week we went over, the Lutheran bishop has been a strong critic of Christian nationalism, saying that there are problems with it. And I'll discuss some of those problems in just a bit. And then finally, we went over the fact that it's not just interested in abortion and gay marriage. There's a correlation between people who are Christian nationalists and a wide range of issues. And there's also this belief that you are under siege. and that we need to get back to where we were, and that Donald Trump was the main person to get us back to where we were in the beginning, that he will take us back to our religious roots. These are three findings that Perry and Whitehead found in all of their research on Christian nationalists. That, first of all, they tended to be patriarchal. They wanted a system where men and women were in their traditional roles. They're militant. The description, the longer description is theirs. The parenthetical one is mine. Is that they're militant. They promote authoritarian control. They're xenophobic. They like people like themselves, but want to keep out others who aren't like them. And then finally, they feel like they're victims, that they're losing their sense of privilege that they used to have in America. Here's the vote by each of these categories. So if you're a rejector in 2020, only less than 4% of the rejectors voted for him. And you see 80% of the people who are considered Christian nationalists voted for Donald Trump. And when we're talking about numbers, 80%, we had how many, 160, 170 million people vote. That's a pretty sizable chunk of the people who voted for Donald Trump. And some of the issues that you might not think that are connected to Christian nationalists, one is the issue of race. If you look just at the white bar, you'll see white Americans who are rejectors agree that reports of police brutality against Black Americans are exaggerated by the media. So if there's a report about George Floyd, this group, the 8% group would be highly skeptical and would think maybe this is exaggerated. So you contrast that with the Christian nationalists, 87%. So 10 times as many Christian nationalists would say that they believed that reports of brutality against Black Americans are largely exaggerated. Only 13% accept that that these are not exaggerations. This is a commentary, it's about the press as well as a commentary about Blacks, but we'll pull out the element about discrimination against Blacks in just a second. And then finally, COVID-19, this is the numbers from 0 to 24. So the 0 end are those who believe in a strict division between church and state. If there are restrictions that are imposed because of COVID-19, if you believe in a strong sense of church and state, you're very concerned about the vulnerable, less concerned about your own personal liberty. But if you're a Christian nationalist, and I mean, this is very interesting. I found this incredible, that if you are a Christian nationalist, you think protecting the economy and protecting your own personal liberty is much more important than protecting the vulnerable. And just yesterday, I saw Scott Walker posted something on Twitter in which he was outside and he had a mask on, and the reaction, the strong reaction from people to his post was, "Why are you wearing a mask? You shouldn't be wearing a mask. That's unnecessary," on and on. So this is one area where there are very distinct views between those who are Christian nationalists and those who are not. And as you see the numbers, there's a sliding scale in both instances. My three takeaways from last week were: Christian nationalists believe God founded America on biblical principles. The country's fallen away and it needs to return to those roots. That they are not Christian nationalists are not the same as American Christians, Christian evangelicals, or strong adherents in the US, strong religious adherents. And finally, that Christian nationalists hold strong views on issues far beyond abortion and same-sex marriage. You guys seem to like the charts in your questions, so I'm going to throw three more at you that might help you in your thinking about Christian nationalism. One, the question is about evangelical Protestants. So you see about 40% of evangelical Protestants fit the classic definition of a Christian nationalist, but then another 40% are sympathetic to that. So you have about 80% in this category. These three categories of evangelical Protestant, mainline Protestant, Black Protestant, they represent 43, 45% of Americans. and you see in each category more people who are sympathetic than are Christian nationalists. And then you have Catholics here. They represent about 20 to 22% of America. So again, the percentage of Christian nationalists has declined, but those who are sympathetic and in the middle are right there. So if you just divide this in half, these are all Christians in America. That's 2/3 of America. And you'll see that there are Christian nationalists among all four groups. Over here are the three groups, about 1/3 of Americans, where there are almost no Christian Americans, Christian nationalists. So it's interesting when people talk about two Americas, you can draw a line between these two groups and see that their ideas about whether America should be a Christian nation, you can see a sharp divide between those two. And another issue that I wanted to lay out is transgender rights. When all four groups are asked, do they agree that transgender people should be allowed to use the public restroom of their choice? Again, you see that those who are rejectors, those who reject Christian America or want a firm wall between church and state, almost 90% of them say that they believe transgender people should be able to choose which bathrooms they're allowed to use in public. Christian nationalists, less than 20% say they should be using it. And then finally, this issue of discrimination and Blacks. The question, this is Andrew Whitehead, in case you're wondering, I stole from a presentation that he did just recently because they just completed some updated results on their work and haven't published this yet. But this is percent of whites and Blacks who believe Blacks face a lot of discrimination. That's the word that's missing up there, a lot of discrimination. So let's look at the white bars again, because among Blacks, the number is very steady. 4 out of 5 believe Blacks face a lot of discrimination. Among white rejectors, 2/3 believe they face a lot of discrimination, but then it falls off dramatically. And by the time you get to Christian nationalists, only 10% of the Christian nationalists say that they believe there's a lot of discrimination. So if you have someone like David Clark who's saying discrimination and prejudice and racism is a thing of the past, he's speaking to this group and this group here, because the vast majority of the people believe racism is not a major factor in our society today. As someone I fit in this resistors category, as I told you last week, I still find these numbers to be pretty amazing. So here are your unresolved questions from last week, ones that you sent me or that you posted that I didn't get to. One, this is a very good question, one that I probably should have addressed more directly last week. And that is, what's the difference between Christian nationalists, Christian evangelicals, and the religious right? So I'm using a Venn diagram here, and imagine this Venn diagram being a lot closer together. This was as good as I could get. But the three categories, and this is the way to think of it. Christian evangelicals, this is a religious category. This is a group with a particular set of beliefs. They believe the Bible is inerrant, that Jesus died, and that as a result that we have salvation, our sins are atoned. This is a religious category. Religious right is a political category. The religious right emerged in the 1970s, and not many people know this, but originally emerged in the 70s as a result of concerns that the IRS was refusing to provide tax exempt status to colleges that barred Blacks from attending, in particular Bob Jones University. But the group that's founded originally thought there wouldn't be enough support for that. And so later in the 70s, they end up shifting to abortion. A guy from Wisconsin, Paul Ryrick, decides abortion would be a much more effective issue to get people together on. Randall Balmer, a historian at Brown University, has done a lot of work on where the religious right emerged. So in 1970, when Roe versus Wade is approved and handed down in the early 70s, a group like the Southern Baptist Convention had very positive things to say about it, but by the 1980s, it was highly critical of abortion. And finally, Christian nationalists, it's an ideology. It's a view, it's a certain collection of views. So some of these overlap, and there are times when someone could belong to all three groups, but there are, say, Christian evangelicals who don't belong to either of these two groups. There's a subset of Christian evangelicals who are very liberal politically. Jim Wallace with Sojourners is one of those people. He holds all of the religious beliefs, but he doesn't hold any of these political beliefs. And there's a subset of Black Protestant evangelicals who might agree on with the religious right on gay marriage, but doesn't agree with them on other social justice issues. So there might be a little bit of overlap there, but for the most part, they're pretty separate from these. And then the religious right is focused heavily on abortion and gay marriage, whereas the Christian nationalists have a much broader agenda of making Christianity more legitimate in the public sphere. So this is a religious group, political group, and ideology. Some overlap, but there are also distinctives among each of the groups. The next one, what are biblical principles? Which is a good question because it seems to assume that the Bible is all one thing. Well, in fact, anybody who's read the Bible, well, there are 31,000 verses, and it says a number of different things. If you're looking for one description of the resurrection in the four Gospels, you're going to find very different stories that are hard to put together. If you're trying to get an answer to, does God punish those who do wrong? You're going to find different answers and whether he punishes their children. You find different answers in Exodus, Ezekiel, and the Gospel of John. So to say that there are biblical principles, you have to impose certain assumptions to remove all of the differences that are in the text. And there are four particular extra biblical assumptions that conservatives come up with to eliminate the dissonance in the text. One is the belief that the Bible was written or dictated by God. So there's one author for the whole text. And that reduces the amount of inconsistencies that might occur. Two, the Bible is consistent with itself and should be interpreted as such. If you have a problem with one section of the Bible, you need to read the other sections of the Bible, and then it'll all become clear. Three, the Bible was intended and relevant for us today. It wasn't just written for people 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, but for us today. And then finally, the Bible is easy to understand. These things hold true for Orthodox Jews, except for the last one. Orthodox Jews believe that the Bible is difficult to understand. So if you're interested in reading more about these, there's an author named James Kugel who has addressed each of these principles and how they apply and how liberals use some of them and don't use some of them. Another term that you'll see a lot among Christian nationalists is biblical worldview. It assumes a one-to-one correspondence between the Bible and the world that we're in right now. Obviously, there are difficulties with that because the Bible comes from a world that's very different from ours. For instance, if you're looking at the issue of slavery, every author who addresses the topic in the Bible assumes that slavery is a natural thing in society. Even Jesus seems to assume that slavery is just natural, whereas almost nobody believes that today. Or people like to use the Bible to deal with sex and pregnancies and other issues related to it. But the fact is, no author in the Bible even understood how children come to be. The discovery of the sperm and the egg doesn't come until 1677. So it's long after that. Just something to remember when you hear people using the Bible to discuss those issues, that there's a big difference between our world and their world. Not that there's nothing that can be relevant, but this one-to-one correspondence where every issue that we think about today should be based in the Bible. It's a difficult situation to come from. Another question, are Christian nationalists primarily from the South? And as I said, there's no demographic group that they all come from, but they do primarily come from the South and the Midwest, or more so than other groups. Another chart. Yes, we have lots of charts. So yes, in the South, there's a higher percentage than any other place, but you do have them in the Northeast, a little bit less than 15%, and you have more than 20% in the West, and in the Midwest and the South is where you'll find most Christian nationalists. And then how do you correlate Christian nationalist belief with Trump's lifestyle? Forgot my apostrophe there. This is one that a number of you have raised, and I think you keep on thinking about it from your understanding of the Bible and moving forward. I want you to think back to Jenny Cupp and how she was thinking when she decided to go to the Capitol to participate in the rally and then the riot. First, she thinks, I believe America was founded as a Christian nation, has fallen away, and needs to return to its roots. I believe Trump is the best person to return to the country to that's Christian foundation. I believe non-Christian forces are preventing President Trump from serving a second term. And then finally, I believe God will protect me as I defend Trump and my country. So that's the logic. It doesn't have to do with Trump's lifestyle or whether he's a good person or a bad person. It's mainly about the belief system and the ideology, and what the person believes is important, and the fact that they believe Trump is the best person to help continue that and to get us back to where we should be. There's also the Rainn Wilson, the guy from The Office, the question that he asked, and I want to touch on this just a little bit. That's how did this metamorphosis of Jesus from a humble servant of the abject poor to a symbol that stands for gun rights, prosperity gospel, limited government, and fierce nationalism occur? How did that happen? And as I told you last week, we had a math portion of the discussion. This is going to be my history portion of the discussion. In the early 20th century, we had a thing that I called the liberal conservative divide in the church. Not that the Protestant church was all together as one, but it was much more unified than it had been. There were divisions over slavery, sure, the Southern Baptist and the Northern Baptist church split. But American Protestantism was somewhat unified. And the mainline churches, the Methodists, the Episcopalians, the Presbyterians, and the Lutherans take a turn, and they begin promoting what's called the social gospel. And that is, they're concerned about what's going on in society. They're concerned about child labor, worker rights, women's suffrage, income inequality, unclean environments, alcoholism, and those become a top priority for the mainline churches. The idea was to take the Lord's Prayer and to apply it to society as what is occurring in heaven should be occurring on earth, and it's our responsibility. They took the Lord's Prayer and Matthew 25 about what you do to the least of my brother, you do unto me. The evangelical churches rejected this wholesale completely and said that you don't have to be involved in these social activities to be a good Christian. And their question, does it help someone to feed their stomach but not help their soul? That's what drove them. What was important was individual salvation. They also established around this time what they called the fundamentals, and that's how fundamentalism came around. They adopted the fundamentals. You have to believe these things to be a good Orthodox Christian. That included believing that the Bible's inerrant, that the earth was created in 7 days, that Jesus was born of a virgin, that his death and resurrection atoned for our sins, and that all of Jesus's miracles were true. And these things are still consistent and true for many evangelicals today. Individual salvation is incredibly important, and believing those essentials. The stuff about social gospel, not important. I'm going to introduce you now to John MacArthur, who's a leading evangelical minister, to tell you that this split still holds today. And this is what he has to say about the social gospel and social justice issues.
You know, I think of the tendency that we see in our age to regard Jesus as the purveyor of social justice, and he came to give us a new law. And one of the famous texts that people will go to at times is the Sermon on the Mount. Well, Jesus was basically giving us a set of new laws. How do you approach that from the aspect of the gospel of Jesus Christ? It's not a law, it's the gospel. And what was Jesus really trying to convey in the Sermon on the Mount?
Well, I would just say it simply this way. There were a lot of social issues during the life and ministry of Jesus. He didn't do anything to overturn any of them. He didn't do anything to change Jewish social structure. He didn't certainly do anything to change Roman social structure. Jesus, in fact, did nothing, absolutely nothing to overthrow slavery. In fact, he took the concept of a slave and made that the illustration, the most dramatic illustration of a believer who confesses him as Lord and then by so doing designates himself as a slave. Mm-hmm. So there was just nothing of social justice in the ministry of Jesus. And people say, well, what about all the healing? Well, the healing was to demonstrate divine compassion as a beginning point for salvation. And Jesus banished illness. He delivered people from demons. He had power over disease, demons, even death, power over nature. He was putting deity on display. But never did he use any of those powers, say, to bring about social justice, to fix law courts, to end poverty. He actually even said, the poor you always have with you. That the message of Jesus was that God is compassionate, that I am God, as demonstrated by the displays of power that I'm doing, and that the offer that I bring to you from God, as God, is for your eternal salvation. Not about restructuring the culture. I know that's a popular concept for unbelievers, but it's off track for believers.
That might be a very different understanding of Christianity than what you have, but John MacArthur's a big power hitter. Even when I was in college, I went to an evangelical college. He was very important in terms of deciding and defining what the faith was for evangelicals. So finally, actually I have two more questions. One question that was asked repeatedly was, why now? Why is this going on now? Why is Christian nationalism becoming a big thing now? And I think there are two reasons for that. One is, this chart helps answer it. For the vast majority of time in America, white Christians, Protestant and Catholic, white Christians made up the vast majority of Americans. At one point in America, 90% of all Americans were white Christians, but that number has dropped and dropped and dropped. And by the year 2014 or 2015, for the first time in America's history, white Christians made up less than 50% of the country. So when you hear this language about a loss of privilege and concerns about that we're victims and that people don't understand us anymore, and the discussion about who is in America, this is a big part of it. That white Christians used to hold a privileged position in America, and that's slipping away. And the fact is, it's going to continue to slip away. If the current trends continue, this is from the Pew Research Group. If you look at the year 2009, 77% of Americans considered themselves Christian. By last year, that had dropped to 65%, same percentage this year, so 65% right now. So you have a 12-point drop in terms of the number of people who say that they are unaffiliated, they have no religious connection to anything. That's risen from 17% to 26%. So a quarter of Americans now say that they're religiously unaffiliated, and this is growing, especially the younger you are. So this is part of the reason I believe that it's happening now. There is a loss of privilege. When Christian nationalists say they're losing some power or influence, I think that's actually true. But at the same time, Trump spoke directly to them. So even though white Christians represent, as we just saw, less than 50% of the overall population, they still make up a solid majority of voters. So they continue to have influence, even though their overall numbers are declining. And then finally, several people asked me what were my problems with Christian nationalism, or what issues are there? And I think there's, I was going to use this as a conclusion, but I'll deal with this issue now. And that is, and I would tell you, if you guys have any questions right now, feel free to stick them in the chat. We have 2 questions now. I can answer those in just a second before we get to the last part of this. But the problems with Christian nationalism, I think they're problems for the country. And I'll use a quote from Justice Blackmun. A government cannot be premised on the belief that all persons are created equal when it asserts that God prefers some people. So it's difficult for America if we say that there is a privileged group of people as opposed to everybody else. So that's a problem for the American government. Then there's a problem for Christianity. And Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry raised this question. If the Christian God has truly always been on our side, America's side, then on whose side are Christians from Iraq, Vietnam, England, Afghanistan, or any other country? So that's a problem for Christianity, that if American Christians are in a privileged position, what does that say about Christians in other countries? On top of those 2 issues, I'll bring up a couple more. Christian nationalists display a lack of tolerance in a diverse multicultural society based on tolerance. This is an issue. 2, it privileges one particular understanding of Christianity and rejects all others. As you saw, there are many other ways to see Christianity, but Christian nationalists tend to believe that theirs is the only legitimate way to see our faith. 3, it treats non-American Christians as inferior. And finally, it ties the fate of the country to one faith and vice versa. I think those are all problems that we have. So if you have any other questions, type them in. If you don't, then I'll head into the last section here. And that is the roots of Christian nationalism. There have been people who've been pushing Christian nationalist beliefs who've been around for a while. I'll start with this guy, R.J. Rushdoony. Starting in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, he started making arguments about the need for us to have a Christian nation. The important thing here, he says, in Armenia, there was no neutral ground. He's from Armenia, between Islam and Christianity. And I came to realize there's no neutral ground anywhere. He grew up in Armenia and escaped right before 1 million Christians were the subject of genocide. And he thought that the government, which was run by the Muslims, was evil. And then he came here and he got a job working on in Native American reservation. And he saw what the government was doing there was very harmful to the Native Americans. So he developed this idea that anything that's secular is anti-Christian. There's only Christian and anti-Christian. And to think of the government as being secular, as being nonpartisan or neutral, he rejected that completely. You either are Christian or non-Christian. And that applies to schools. Schools are either Christian or non-Christian, and non-sectarian schools in his mind were pagan. And he starts pushing this idea in the 60s and 70s, and he starts encouraging people, evangelical Christians and others like him, to start homeschooling their children. He's considered the father of the current homeschooling movement, lays out the ideology and the beliefs for this. But he also comes to say that the secular government is anti-Christian and that we need to get rid of it. That the roots of secular government are based in the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment is evil, and therefore we should reject it. And so instead, he said America should operate as a theonomy, believing that we should take the laws from the Old Testament and apply it where we can. That creates a lot of problems for some people. He believed we should use capital punishment to apply to not just murder, but also to children who misbehave, to adultery, to rape, to any number of other crimes taken from the Old Testament. There are more than 30 crimes in the Old Testament that apply capital punishment. So later in his life, in the 70s and 80s, some of his followers, including Francis Schaeffer and some other ones, distanced themselves because of, one, his views on the Holocaust. He disputed that 6 million Jews were killed. He said maybe 1 million, maybe a little less than that. Views on capital punishment and other views like that. Next, dominion theology. This is C. Peter Wagner. He's the godfather of dominionist ideology, according to Catherine Stewart, the author of The Power Worshippers, a book that's, if you're interested in this, something that you should look at. It's a very good book. Dominion theology emerges in the 70s. And if you're familiar with Pat Robertson, he's a member of the Dominionist school. His law school is called Regent Law School, and there's a reason, because he believes his students should become regents and take over and help run America. And it's based on this verse from Genesis 1:28 that says that humans are to have dominion over every living thing on the earth. And Wagner taught that there were 7 areas where they needed to take control. He called them the 7 mountains. That's the government, business, education, the media, the arts, the family, and religion. And it was incumbent on true Christians, and true Christians fit his definition. He thought that they should begin actively pursuing these areas. And he said that they're to follow, quote, biblical principles when they take over these areas. He wasn't as extreme as Rushdoony. He didn't think that you should bring back Old Testament law, but he thought they should follow biblical principles. And then finally, Ted Cruz has been associated with this theology. He denies it, and became a big dispute in 2016 as to whether he believed dominion theology or not. Before we go on to what's going on today, the fact is neither of these theologies are going to take hold and take control in America right now. Economists have a thing that they call path dependence. Basically, history matters. If Bernie Sanders takes over as president right now, he's not going to be able to institute a full-scale socialist agenda. He's not going to start buying private property and so forth. Americans just won't stand for that because of where we are and what we are in the past. So he'll make incremental changes related to sociology. And the same is like true with Reconstructionist and dominion theology. If one of those got into some sort of power, they wouldn't be able to institute these Old Testament laws. It's something, it's a theory that wouldn't have a chance of ever becoming fully implemented, or not anytime soon. But there is a more realistic agenda that Christian nationalists are pursuing right now in state houses around the country, including in Wisconsin. And I'm going to introduce you to a guy named David Barton, the founder of WallBuilders. He believes, his statement, the founders never intended to separate Christianity from government, only to keep a single denomination from running the nation. He believed the wall of separation between church and state's one direction. It's to keep the government from affecting religion, but it did not stop religion from affecting the government. In fact, he said he believed that the states all should be allowed to pick their religion of choice, Christianity, and that the government, the US Constitution shouldn't be involved in dictating what those should be. But America should be and is a Christian nation, he believes. And if you want to hear what he has to say, here's Barton, and his son Tim Barton now is becoming very prominent among Christian nationalists.
This is the attitude of the guys. This is what they knew. This is their knowledge base. So when they got together to write the Constitution, it is absolutely no surprise that so many of the clauses we find in the Constitution are literal, direct quotations out of the Bible. Today we're told, oh no, Constitution secular. No, just because they didn't put a chapter and verse by it doesn't mean it wasn't a Bible verse. Check the language of the Constitution against the Bible, and you go, that is an exact quote. There's so many clauses I can take you through where that they use the Bible to create these institutions, a Republican form of government. We're required by Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution to have a Republican, not a Democratic form of government. We're a republic, not a democracy. Came directly out of Exodus 18:21. Exodus 18:21, Deuteronomy 1:13 through 6.
So just look at this for a second. This is Exodus 18:21. The verse is, it's Moses's father-in-law talking to him, because Moses at this time, he's got 6 million, he's got several million people with him that have come out of Egypt, and he's hearing every dispute among every group of people in the group that he's leading. And so Jethro suggests he set up a certain system for dealing with these sorts of disputes. He says, select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials, judges over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And so Barton would say, this is the basis for our Constitution. That the problem is there's no mention in any of the historical record that the founding fathers used this verse. Instead, this is a case where Barton and the other people are going back and finding texts and trying to argue that this was the basis for the Constitution. But more important, Barton embodies Christian nationalism. As I told you, there's the past, present, and future. His past, he leads these seminars, and you can go on a Capitol tour today and he'll take you around and show you why the government and why the Capitol is Christian. And the two, his present, he ran a super PAC for Ted Cruz's presidential campaign along with Kellyanne Conway, spent millions of dollars in helping Ted Cruz. After Cruz loses, he became a leading supporter of Donald Trump, called him God's guy. And now today, he's one of 4 leaders of a group pushing a thing called Project Blitz. I don't know if you've heard of Project Blitz. It's something that's operating primarily at the state levels. It's basically coming up with model legislation and talking points and proclamations to help legislators push ideas that Christian nationalists favor. Project Blitz says the purpose of Project Blitz is to protect free exercise of traditional Judeo-Christian religious values and beliefs in the public square, and to push religious liberty issues. They claim 950 lawmakers in 38 states are currently pushing their ideas. And this group emerged in 2017. So this is a new group that's been formed. Blitz Watch, which opposes them, calls it a coordinated effort by Christian nationalists to inject religion into public education, attack reproductive health, and undermine LGBTQ equality using a distorted definition of religious freedom. So what exactly are they doing? They have a 3-step process where they start with legislation where they think a majority of legislators will support them. One, and you can see states that have done this already, allow schools to post "In God We Trust" signs and mandate states offer "In God We Trust" license plates. Minnesota's done this, letting people post the signs in their schools. And I think there are 10 or 11 states that have this "In God We Trust" license plates. And the legislation comes directly from this group, the Project Blitz group. 2, then they've started pushing, requiring public schools to offer an elective class on the Bible. Kentucky passed a bill like this in 2019. There are 20 other states where there's legislation like this pending. And then it starts becoming a little more controversial. They have bills to provide state-funded attorneys to school employees who've been sued for promoting their own religious beliefs. And then they pursue a particular definition of religious liberty. They want states to pass laws allowing hospitals, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and other healthcare professionals to deny patient care based on their religious beliefs. And then finally, they want adoption agencies and foster care agencies to have the right to refuse services to gay and lesbian couples based on their religious beliefs. So this is what the agenda is that they're pushing. So my takeaways, and then I'll get to a bunch of your questions. 1, Christian nationalism matters. It's something that's relevant and having an influence right now. That it may be, Christianity may be in decline in America, but Christian nationalism remains a force in American politics. And then finally, Christian nationalism is bad for America and it's bad for Christianity. And I told you why earlier with my problems. It privileges a particular group and it makes American Christianity superior to other types of Christianity. A couple of questions. Is there ways to measure the true political strength of Christian nationalists? You can't isolate it out, I don't think, and say this is exactly what they're doing, except for with Project Blitz, which is run by 4 Christian nationalists. They acknowledge they're Christian nationalists, like David Barton, and they are pushing it. Another one of the guys involved runs a company that keeps voter data. He's got voter data on 190 million Americans. He and George Barna, who's a pollster for the evangelicals, they're trying to target 10%, the most active and devoted 10% of Christian nationalists, and get them to make sure that they turn out at the polls. They're contacting pastors and telling them to get a certain number of people, and even particular people in their churches, to try to become active. So they are a force, and they continue to be a force, and will, I think, even become more powerful as time comes. How can we help more people to discern the fundamental values that they have in common? That's a good question. Actually, reading about Christian nationalists has been depressing because the way a Christian nationalist sees something and the way the rejector sees something is so dramatically different. It's a hard thing to see where they're going to come together. But I do think that you can, I mean, if you don't see our history as the same, it's a hard thing to see the solutions to our current problems as being similar. And, you know, I do want to teach a class on, is America a Christian nation? Which I think is a multifold question, has multifold answer. But I think it's a tough thing. I don't have a very good answer to what sort of common issues we can bring together. I mean, our there are American values that we all share. A respect for democracy, and a sense of freedom and liberty, but a lot of those things are defined differently. And then if you can see that the first 200 years of the American enterprise was primarily Puritan, you can make a good case for the fact that the Puritans believed that America was founded by God. If you being with the Declaration of Independence, you can make the case that many signers were deists, not Christians, in some case atheists. I think that's going to take another entire class to get back to what were we originally and what are we now. And a look at the history. So I'm not going to be able to answer that right away. I do believe the Puritans were around. They lost their charter in the late 1600s. The Declaration of Independence does have 4 mentions of a deity of some sort. The Constitution has only one. That one is to say that there's no religious test for public office. But there's a difference between culture and the Constitution, and that's where the bridge is. Were we primarily a Christian culture? Yes. Was the Constitution primarily Christian? I don't think it was. So those are all the questions. Thanks for coming to the class. Is there anything more you want to say, Sue?
No, any more questions though? I don't see anything else in the chat.
Yeah, those are everything that I see.
Okay,
So thank you for the class. I mean, thanks for attending the class. I hope it's been helpful. And if you do have additional questions, feel free to email me. My email again is daniel.m.bice@gmail.com or dbice@jrn.com. And this class will be on YouTube. If you want to see it again, we'll post somewhere that it is available.
yep, thank you. Thank you very much. there's nothing else, I'm going to end the meeting and see you all soon.
Thanks.